everyone, thanks for being here. I hope you're doing really well and having a good day wherever you are. So for today's podcast session, I'm talking with Matt Johnson. Now, Matt is the press coordinator for the animal rights organisation Direct Action Everywhere. Direct Action Everywhere are a grassroots organisation who conduct non-violent direct actions, such as disruptive protests, open rescues, and they also conduct undercover investigations. Matt is a very passionate and opinionated person. I think he's got a lot of interesting stuff to say. And in this conversation, we talk about animal advocacy strategy, what it's like to be in a factory farm. And we talk about a specific undercover investigation that I'm sure you're all going to find absolutely shocking. Now, despite the heavy subject matter, I really did enjoy talking to Matt, and I hope you also enjoy listening to it. I also hope you find something valuable to take away from this conversation. So here's Matt Johnson. Maybe just start by telling me a bit about yourself. How did you get involved in the kind of work that you're doing?
Yeah, so if you really go back to the real beginning of what I think kind of led me to the work I'm doing today, I think going back to when I was a kid, and I had a reaction that I think is a really common reaction, actually, that a lot of children have when they first piece this together and say, hey, or figure out that this food on their plate is not just a benign piece of food. But in my case, I had my family members and they're my uncles who were deer hunters. And I have a very vivid memory of being 4 years old, and I have roll and in the deer flesh, venison, whatever you want to call it, right there, I have one bite out of it, and they're kind of standing behind me having a conversation, and I'm piecing it together for the first time in my life, like, oh, okay, this is a dead deer right here. And I went to and one bite out of it, looking down, and that was the last bite. And I went to my parents that night. No knowledge of anything like an animal rights movement or the word vegan or vegetarian, or I didn't even use the word meat. Children kind of see things with a lot of clarity, really. I went to my parents and I said, I don't want to eat animals. And yeah, they were, okay, this is kind of a phase. That was sort of what they thought and so on. But that was really the start of it. I've never knowingly eaten animal flesh in my life. So that was kind of starting like right at that point. And throughout my childhood, I sort of had like this visceral reaction, like, this is not right. This is way messed up. And I mean, I remember kind of at around this point, I'm going to kindergarten and I'm seeing the kind of posters and stuff on the wall that are all like the golden rule and being kind to others and so on. And it was just very strange to me. But at the same time, then you kind of got the social pressure, the social norms around it of religion, God give us animals for food, this sort of thing. I had an aunt of mine who was telling me I was going to die if I don't eat meat, which is pretty interesting because she didn't quite, literally, even at like 5 years old, I'm like, okay, you didn't say that in the intensity that I would expect if you were serious. I was like kind of calling her bluff. Like, let's just wait till I'm like starting to die and then I'll reassess. But it's so far so good. Anyway, so that kind of, I was just very conflicted. My family is very religious. God gave us animals for food, apparently. And so, long story short, my childhood and through high school graduation, I was kind of this conflicted, silent vegetarian. I had friends that were in my kindergarten class all the way through my high school graduation that didn't even know. I would literally go to school lunches and I would have a lunchbox prepared and I would have food inside of it. And I would just like minimize the distance between the lunchbox and my mouth. I would just grab like a little piece of my, peanut butter and jelly sandwich or my cheese sandwich or whatever. Cause I just like didn't want to go there because it's weird and I'm physically weak, cause I don't have this protein in my diet. And I'm somebody who I watched NFL football so much, and I loved to play football at recess. By the time I got to 7th grade, where there was tackle football, I didn't do it because I thought I'm just going to get injured. I'm weak and I don't have, whatever, the protein and the strength and the whatever. As much as I love the game, I'm not going to do it because I'm just like in fear of that. And it's just really strange to look back at it. I mean, people around me had very good intentions, but they were misguided, I would say, in a lot of different fronts. It's so strange to look back at it, but I think I've made up for my silence as a child into my adulthood. So there you go.
Interesting that you had it was so intuitive to you that this was an ethical issue. How old were you when the deer incident happened?
So I was 4 years old when I first kind of pieced it together, and I've thought about this a lot. Like, what was it that was, was there something that was unique about me, which maybe to some extent there's that. I think it's also part of it is the polarizing effect, where I think that a lot of kids, and you look on YouTube and Facebook, there's a lot of videos out there of kids that are, what you might call secondhand trauma of figuring out like that this is what the reality of the food is. And for me, it was just like, are these people around me just monsters? Because they were, and I kind of, these uncles of mine, I know them to this day, and they're normal, people, whatever. But at the time, they're, 20-something-year-old guys that are kind of normal 20-something-year-old guys, and they think it's kind of funny to whatever hassle this kid and mock him. And at one point they were they're deer hunters, and so they called me outside to this shed, hey Matthew, come here, whatever. And they had a deer hung upside down. They painted the deer's nose red. This is around Christmas time, and I didn't think it was Rudolph, but I did think like these people are monsters. And I think, as much as we talk about how polarized our politics are and how bad that is, and that's pretty much correct, sometimes, I think it had a positive effect on me. Like, I think if my family was around me and really validating my fears and saying like, I know it's really unfortunate, but this is the way the world is, or like, whatever they're telling normal, or, not normal, but commonly telling, children here in that circumstance, I might be a very different person today. But as it was just in my head as a very young child, it was a very clear division between apparently just myself and the whole damn world of good and evil. And that sort of set this whole life path in motion.
Yeah. Dr. Melanie Joy talks about the invisible belief system, carnism. And when you think about children, it seems, well, maybe children of 4 years old haven't really been long enough to develop that invisible belief system. You mentioned the footage we see of children like reacting to animal slaughter. Man, some of the most powerful footage I've ever seen, watching children react to animals they know being slaughtered, because they're reacting in the same way a human would react if it was a human being about to have their throat slit. They're just really seeing it as this terrible, terrible, horrific thing. And then adults don't see that. They don't see it the same way. So it's really interesting. But what's also interesting is that, you weren't just silent about it as you grew up. You kind of actively hid it. And that kind of pressure to hide it is obviously going to be damaging to growing a community of animal rights activists. So kind of concerning that people feel that kind of pressure to hide it, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And then you see it in all sorts of contexts of, even, okay, amongst people who are animal rights activists, then it's, everybody wants to fit in, right? Like, human beings are social creatures. Like, we want to fit in, we want to have a crew, which is why people need to have a community of people who are on their team. And you always kind of wonder with some of the, more controversial tactics, it's like, yeah, I mean, maybe jumping on the stage at a Bernie Sanders rally and women are topless or something like that. Maybe it's horrible. Like, maybe let's have that conversation. I've been a part of organizing those sorts of demonstrations, but how much of it, perhaps, well, not perhaps, certainly part of it is just people's own discomfort with it, which is not in and of itself, right? It's like the social, at the end of the day, that shouldn't be the thing. If we're just really sort of fundamentally thinking about it, it shouldn't be the thing that motivates us, right? We should follow maximum efficacy. That should be our North Star. Like, we can all know, like, we're human beings and we all have some self-interest and we want to live like an enjoyable life. We want to have friends, whatever, but the North Star should be maximum efficacy. And so if,
Right.
you got Buddhist monks that are lighting themselves on fire, at the Vietnam War, a lot of reasons you're not going to get a lot of press nowadays. By the way, I've thought about this. And I've looked into this. People have done this. You're not going to get a lot of press if you light yourself on fire. So it's not effective. I'm saying if it was effective, we'd have a very interesting conversation to be having. But fortunately / unfortunately for us, it's not effective. And you are more effective if you just live your life out and just like work hard for animals. But yeah, it's on down the line. It's like various forms of activism. We should, have a conversation, be open-minded to it, and try to set aside awkwardness, discomfort, like whatever, to really assess things.
So yeah, I agree with what you're saying. Like the goal, we need to think about the outcomes. How can we most effectively help animals? How can we reduce their suffering? I guess the idea of like being liked, wanting to be liked, and being effective. I guess it's not so black and white, because we know that there's psychological evidence that if someone likes you, they're more likely to be convinced by you. So I suppose it does make sense that we want to come across well and we want to be liked by the general public. We certainly don't want to come across as annoying, and we want people to dislike us and think of us negatively, because then they're less likely to want to join us or take us seriously, I suppose. So I suppose that balance is always there.
Yeah, I think that's correct in terms of a good general way to look at it. You want to be relatable to people and so on. One sort of caveat there that I think we should also be conscious of, and this makes me think a lot of DXC's early days, where there was a lot of protests and disruptions inside of grocery stores, inside of restaurants, and so on, where very clearly we're not welcome and we're not appealing to the people, certainly in the moment that they're there. Is that if you have a cause that is just completely not discussed, is completely eliminated from the public discourse, and maybe sort of kind of hopefully we're evolving past that with the animal rights movement, arguably, but if something is just not being discussed at all, and you're on the side of justice, then sometimes getting it on the table, and even if people are mocking you, then that can actually be a step forward. If your message, what you look for in those instances is like, even if our message is mocked, is it clearly understood? And you look at, women's suffragettes in the UK and in the US, there's all sorts of like political cartoons, enormously offensive in all the ways, sexist, and on down the line. And these are women who are causing just being very disruptive of all sorts of government meetings. And they were widely mocked and widely unpopular to begin with. And then at some point, people are like, yeah, women should not vote because, It's like, oh, these people think we shouldn't hurt animals because ... So, it's, we should be open-minded to say, maybe something has a visceral negative reaction. Maybe we ourselves don't want to be that person who's got blood all over your body, dumped over your head, or like whatever in the middle of a grocery store. But let's try to take a step back and evaluate. And maybe you decide it is like not the place and the time. And I think that's right plenty of the time, but maybe it is. I don't know.
Yeah. You mentioned time. I think we should definitely be open to thinking about how our tactics can change over time. So it might be the case that now, while the public generally isn't on board with all of our messaging, or maybe we're like very, very early adopters in terms of being part of the animal rights community, it may be that we need to seem less radical. And then maybe as time goes on and we gain traction and we build more of a community and the public are more sort of on our side, then maybe we can be more radical with our messaging, and then those more radical things will actually be like, wow, they'll get more people on board. It's really difficult, isn't it, to try and, when we're thinking about effectiveness. And I guess, yeah, I mean, we're starting to delve already into animal advocacy strategy. So let's talk about what kind of work you're doing with DXE.
Well, yeah, I'm officially the press coordinator for DXE, which by definition would be a pretty kind of low key, sending out the press releases and just setting up the interviews and not being a part of it. But what I think is a big advantage of DXE being a grassroots organization is that it's very kind of free form, and that people who are passionate can sort of jump in and take advantage of opportunities and so on. And you're not, sort of boxed into a very rigid hierarchical structure. So what I am on paper is a lot different than what I am in the public eye, which has been a lot of investigatory work. Probably the first kind of big one that got a lot of media attention was investigating this pig farm owned by Iowa State Senator Ken Rosenboom, who was behind the ag-gag, one of the early renditions of the Iowa ag-gag law. And so got a lot of media attention when it's like, oh, okay, this guy is passing this law. And then it's like, well, here's why. Here's why this guy wants to make it illegal and wants to deter people from recording inside of farms. Showed, won't go into details, plenty of horrific things inside of his farm. And then that sort of snowballed in terms of public support and in terms of media coverage into a whistleblower from Iowa Select Farms, which is the largest pork producer, quote unquote pork producer in Iowa. This person was a truck driver. He's now public. His name is Lucas Walker. Got in touch with us, and and I think it's very powerful to point, to really emphasize that point. We have somebody. I mean, this is a man who he has pigs in his backyard, which we don't feel great about. But the point is that this is somebody who's very entrenched in the industry. He's a truck driver for this massive factory farming company, and he was mortified by what he saw. And it caused him to contact us, to contact who you would think would be his mortal enemies. And he's now a friend of mine, really. And long story short, this led us to capturing the first ever footage of this ventilation shutdown, is what it's called. The first ever time it was caught on tape as it applies to pigs. And arguably it has this very dubious distinction of being the most horrific factory farm footage ever caught on tape. You literally have pigs just screaming for their lives for hours on end. What were you saying?
Yeah, I was going to say ventilation shutdown doesn't sound too bad. I mean, the term sounds kind of, it doesn't sound particularly brutal. It sounds like nothing much. What actually is it?
Yeah. So they shut off literally the ventilation. They put insulation over the vents and make sure the doors are closed tight, and all the vents where air can come in and out are sealed off. So you just have this like airtight barn, load thousands of pigs inside, pump in heat, pump in steam, and over the series of several hours, the pigs are killed. And the audio, we captured audio, we captured video of this. And if people want to check it out, it's out there. If people want to contact me, I can make sure you have access to it. But if you don't want to subject yourself to that, I can just tell you, if you imagine what it would sound, what the sound you would envision if it was like Times Square, New York City, massive crowds, a bomb goes off, and people are dying, scrambling, confused, terrified, like what that would sound like the 10 seconds after a bomb goes off, and just like stretch that out into like 1 or 2 hours. That's pretty much what we're talking about, what it sounded like for these pigs. And, as a thank you for exposing this horrifying and criminal conduct, I am now facing most significantly a felony prosecution and some other charges, including very recently now an ag-gag charge in Iowa, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 years in prison potentially. And the company, despite us having a legal opinion, despite, first of all, common sense telling you that what they're doing is horrifying, but also a legal opinion and a veterinary opinion supporting the claim that what they're doing is not just horrifying on the face of it, but also criminal conduct. They're facing no repercussions and have been thoroughly catered to by the government officials in Iowa, to whom they have contributed hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Let me see if I can kind of reflect this back to you, just so I know I'm getting this straight. So somebody who works for this factory farm in Iowa reached out to you and told you that there was something terrible happening on his farm. I mean, this guy is a meat eater himself. He keeps his own pigs, but he thought, this is so terrible that something needs to be done about this. You then managed to get some undercover footage and audio of what was happening. The ventilation shut down, and you turn the audio on, and you just hear screams, just lots and lots of screaming animals. Sound like they're being tortured. I suppose with this kind of thing, you must see a lot of this kind of animal cruelty and a lot of animal suffering in your job. Are you emotionally affected when you first hear a sound like that?
Well, that's a great question. I think, it's kind of interesting to go back to kind of my childhood experience, where I think if the pop psychology in me, and I've done a little bit of research into this. I think what I experienced would qualify as secondhand trauma as a child, and not even at the, there wasn't the visceral footage or, anything like that I saw, but just like the very notion, like all these people around me are totally cool with this. Apparently it's like I could just eat bread or something, but they're like choosing to go along with this whole killing and eating animals thing. And so to me, in my experience, that was when I kind of had that whatever you want to call that, where it was just, whoa, I don't even know what to do with this. And for better, for worse, I think, there's some good and some bad to it. I think like as an adult, it's just more of a kind of objective, I guess, like kind of cold in a way. It's just like, this is the whatever's going on in the world, and I'm just gonna like zoom in on, what do I do to make it better? And I mean, you have these, literally while this ventilation shutdown is happening, I'm at a hotel room 10 minutes away. We got this app that's streaming footage, and so like this whole thing is going down, and I'm talking to other folks who are involved with this whole project, and it's like, yeah, I mean, part of me is just like, let's go there right now and just bust that door open and whatever, that's like your emotions, and you do the quote unquote objective, maximum impact sort of thing to do. And but yeah, I mean, I don't know, it doesn't emotionally weigh on me, which I probably, net think is an advantage. But it's complicated and weird and uncomfortable,
What were your initial thoughts when you first heard the sound?
Horrifying. Actually, when we talked about this, we were wondering, like, maybe is this a thing where it's not as bad as it sounds, where it's like pigs are, over the course of time, they're overheating and they just kind of like pass out, and it's like not a big deal. It's like, yeah, not that at all. Very just, it was infuriating and all. I mean, it was infuriating, I guess, to really be real about it. I mean, this was like a month-long project, and there was several failed attempts, which I could go into that. I could talk about that for an hour, but we spent several weeks trying to capture this and failing. And I mean, 8 days before we actually captured it, we were on site with them. And instead of using these motion detector security cameras, we had actual GoPros, and we were trying to run in there and plant them. And they had people on site, and it didn't work. And we were like sprinting out of there while we're like surrounded by trucks coming in from this company. So it's like they're all around us and we're hiding out behind farm equipment on site here. And we're sprinting away, trying to not get caught so we could come back in a week or whatever. So it was like this whole like ordeal. So mega conflicted because I was very happy with like 3 asterisks, a footnote attached to that. I was very happy, it's like, okay, this horrible thing is happening. We got the footage. I'm very elated that we got this shit on footage. If it's going to happen, we need to get on footage. Very happy about that. Mortified and affirmed in thinking that, yeah, this is pretty goddamn horrific. So kind of all that and sleep deprived, like staying up all night because like I'm not gonna I didn't even try to sleep that night. It's like they're gonna be bringing pigs in the middle of the night. I'm gonna just deal with this. And then the following morning, actually, after it was kind of all said and done, we ended up going to the site. So there's thousands of pigs. Well, most of them are dead. I think a few of them probably weren't dead because they didn't really follow proper procedures, and a lot of pigs could be incapacitated and still alive. Another level of depravity that they just don't care about. But we went there. We confronted the COO, the Chief Operating Officer of Iowa Select Farms. His name is Noel Williams, and it was a very bizarre situation because you could tell like his whole demeanor. He's used to living in Iowa and it's like very authoritarian. And he thought, you could just tell the way he acted. He thought that as soon as he walked up to me and he said, "You're trespassing, please leave. I have no comment." Like he thought that was going to be the end of it. It's like, if you're in Iowa and you kind of have the old school values, like a legal prosecution or being a lawbreaker, like that is just unfathomably bad. And nobody would willfully step into that. And he just expected us to leave. And we were not close to, doing that. And he was just caught flat-footed. And so what follows is 10 minutes of us recording this horror show and 10 minutes of him just repeating himself, just like looking, the physical embodiment of his shame. He would not make eye contact with us. And he literally would not say anything other than, "I have no comment, please leave." And 10 minutes of that, and and then I got pretty angry with him there by the end, which I guess worked out. Like in terms of social media, got people to view it, so it worked out in terms of that. Yeah.
You're very focused on outcomes. How do we? You kind of, when you were a child, you acknowledged the problem and you felt the emotions of it. And now, as an adult and as someone who's working against the industry, you've got such a focus on outcomes that when you can hear that terrible agony of animals, and you can feel some joy in a way because it means that, wow, I've caught it. It's been this really long project. I've got it, and that means we can do something about it. So I can totally understand like how that can feel so conflicting, because what's happening is terrible, and you'd think you'd hear that and just be like, no, this is just abysmal. This is so terrible. But I guess for someone like you who's doing this kind of work, if you were just allowing yourself to just feel it emotionally and just always be in that feeling, that stage of empathy for these animals, maybe you wouldn't be as effective at what you're doing. So I certainly wouldn't feel guilty about it. And I've often wondered about this myself, because sometimes I can kind of just spend time thinking about animal suffering and how bad it is, both farmed animal and wild animal suffering. And sometimes I think, like I've already acknowledged this now, I don't need to go over it again. But on the other hand, I sometimes wonder, does that motivate us to work harder? Does it keep our eye on the goal when we allow ourselves to feel it like that and to really try and be empathetic about it? Were you actually arrested as a result of this, or were you just, because I thought I read that you got arrested and you went on a hunger strike, but maybe that was a different investigation?
No, that was this one. So the day it was recorded, they they had no idea it was going to happen, and I confronted the COO, and I don't know if they talked about calling the police, and I was fully accepting and open to the possibility the cops were going to show up and arrest me right there. It didn't happen. I think that was probably the result of them just timing. Because now that they brought so many more charges against us, I no longer really think that they were savvy above it and be like, oh, let's not draw attention to this. Like, no, they have, it's like they are a hammer and, hammer nail, one solution that they have in their playbook. But so it was actually about a week and a half after we captured the footage that it was published by Glenn Greenwald. So then they had their time to call up their cronies to kind of do their bidding. And our legal complaints about criminal animal cruelty were completely summarily dismissed. And, we were never, the way we found out it was in the paper. They're like, oh, well, the state veterinarian said they followed proper protocols, so this investigation is over in terms of the animal. It was like one line in the press, which there's a million things wrong with that conclusion. I don't think we need to get into legalese, but yeah, it was illegal conduct, and they weren't really wanting to look at it. But when it actually was released, Glenn Greenwald, wrote this write-up in The Intercept, and that came out. And then the following morning, 5 a.m., our hotel room, banging on the door. I'm asleep, barely just waking up, thinking this must be a very persistent housekeeping person. Like, why are you knocking multiple times? What time is it? I don't know what the hell's going on. Just open the door. Okay, there you go. Dragged off, taken to jail. There's when I was told at the time, this is really interesting for people to think about too, in terms of, how they kind of bluff you. $5,000 bond. So you need to put up $5,000 to be released at any point. And felony prosecution with some felony larceny and misdemeanor trespass and wiretapping charge, big scary stuff, and they're going to keep me. And we had, we kind of thought there was a good chance this was going to happen. So we sort of had it lined up, and it was like, okay, well, I'm going to tell you as respectfully as I know how that I am not going to be paying your bond, and I'm not going to be signing any sort of conditional release, which the lawyers I've talked to is like nobody ever gets released from jail without signing a conditional release. And so I said, we're not paying your bond. I'm not signing anything to be released. I'm also not eating any food until the governor of Iowa addresses this issue. And lo and behold, 24 hours later, I was kicked out of jail. They wouldn't let me stay. I bro, we don't care. You're not signing nothing. You're not eating nothing. You're not whatever. You're a big goddamn headache, and you need to go. Which, that's not going to happen all the time. You got to have your media strategy lined up and so on. So don't come yelling at me when you whatever. But it's they put on a facade. They put on a face up there, and they're pretty damn terrified of what we can do to them, at least as much as, we are terrified of what they can do to us.
Absolutely. It sounds like you called their bluff there. I mean, it's every time, I've read about the story, but before we had this conversation, but every time I hear it, it just amazes me that someone can expose animals being roasted alive, and then that individual is thrown in jail. Like, that is just unbelievable. I mean, it's like how does a country end up with those kind of laws?
Yeah, it's such a. I mean, by the point that we're at in the U.S. now, it's just such a, very unfortunately, this sort of self-reinforcing system, because in many instances you have government agencies, which is completely illegal. Government agencies are lobbying the government. So it's just like, hey, government, what do you think you should do? Well, I have a bunch of money and a bunch of influence. I think the government, it's just, it's so ridiculous on the face of it. But, we're going to, it's just like you shine a light on this stuff a little bit, and the public is reacting the same way, same way you do, the same way anybody does. And so it's kind of like, the playground bully. It's just like, puffs his chest, and then somebody comes along and non-violently, DXC is a non-violent group, but maybe you non-violently punch that bully in the mouth, and suddenly things change real quick when somebody does that.
Mm-hmm. And ventilation shutdown, is that something that's still happening now?
So It is there wouldn't be any, there's not a profit motive at the moment for it to happen now. So it's not like I think that, these amoral entities have come to Jesus. But I think that, but it's not. So the reason that it was done was because there was this, necessity, even in terms of a profit necessity, to kill a bunch of pigs because all these slaughterhouses shut down. And so from a pure profit perspective, they had to just kill and quote unquote waste pigs. Mm-hmm. And so they went with the cheapest method to do so. So there's no reason it would be happening now because slaughterhouses are alive and well and functioning normally. It is still on the books as something that, would be an industry approved method for depopulation in what they call constrained circumstances, which is the industry intentionally leaves these sort of things very open to interpretation, and then they interpret them as widely as possible because an ordinary person, not myself, I'd be, a little more quote unquote radical than an ordinary person perhaps, but an ordinary person perhaps would say like, well, if you have something like African swine fever where it's extremely contagious and extremely deadly among pigs, then you might say, well, we can't, if we transport pigs, then we can infect other pigs and we could have all the pigs in the country get infected. So that is a circumstance where it is more, a little more defensible to say, we do something is, it's like we have to kill all these pigs in place. We cannot move them. We cannot wait. We have to kill them right here, right now. I still think, there's a million things wrong with that conclusion. Maybe you get a gun out, or maybe we could just not kill pig, whatever. But with this, it was purely financial. Like COVID is a human disease. It's pure money. There's nothing else. So the constrained circumstances are, we want to make more profit. Pretty disgusting.
I mean, even the people who don't see an ethical issue with the actual killing of animals, let's say you have to kill them all in this one place. It seems that, it's hard to think of a worse way to die. It seems like, if you wanted to cause incredible amounts of suffering, this would be a good way to do it. But yeah, before we move on, just let that sink in, that pigs were being roasted alive. A person exposed it, and that person was arrested. If there was ever a sign that there is something deeply wrong with our society, that's a big sign right there. And what a sense of injustice that brings out, really.
Oh, 100%. And I know you had Temple Grandin on your podcast here recently, and Temple Grandin wrote on this very topic about just, everything we're saying right now about how, this is the feeblest of purely financial motivation to do this. And that's, sort of coming back to what we were talking about earlier of how the most horrible stuff is in a way the most useful stuff, because it just highlights our point. And it's like, what jury, in the world, okay, yeah, on paper, you can throw all these charges at me. What random sample of my peers anywhere in Iowa? I grew up in Iowa. They're not crazy, sadistic, horrible people. There's some social norms and, yada, yada about how wholesome farming is. But no, if I'm on a stand and I am just allowed to speak for a few minutes, nah, bro, you're gonna get roasted, and I'm gonna out of there, and you're gonna regret every bit of this.
Oh man, I hope it goes to court. Well, how interesting!
I do too. It's not. I don't. Yeah, they've already had. So there were lower level charges. It's kind of a complicated thing. We did the investigation, and then we did some direct action campaign, which actually got them to stop doing it. The time when we captured on footage was the last time they ever did it. So, kind of a weird victory. It's a very substantial victory that probably tens of thousands of pigs were spared this horrible fate by our protest campaign. But anyways, we released the investigation. Then we did protests at this site, and we physically blocked trucks from coming in. And we did protests at the CEO's house, and we did protests at the COO's house, who I was talking about earlier. people were arrested as part of that, and I was arrested. And those two charges related to the protests, we called their bluff. We went to trial. They refused to testify, and the trial was dropped against Cheyenne Holiday, who's another activist, and a charge was dropped against me when we, called their bluff. We said, like, let's go to trial. Let's hear what you have to say about this. And it was a good chance they would have prevailed because the letter of the law, is written by folks like them. But even so, they had no interest in showing up, and kind of, confirmed what we already like. You seem pretty dumb about PR, but are you that dumb? Okay, you're not quite that dumb.
Let's hope that the more of the mainstream media to get on this story, because it really seems like something that more people need to hear about. So let's talk about, we're kind of going into animal advocacy strategy here. I want to know how you decide what to focus on. What brought you to this kind of strategy?
Yeah, great question. So, I think, if you kind of look at the mission and the theory of change of direct action everywhere, I think it's, obviously, I think it's a pretty persuasive one. It's been the last 6 years of my life. And, Wayne Shung in particular, one of DXC's co-founders, close friend of mine, best mentor I've ever had. I, talk to him on a daily basis. And, what I think really adds up is that looking at the history of successful social movements is building a mass movement. So what's it going to take to get people to take mass action? And so it might be kind of like a multiple step, like, okay, you get media attention, then people get outraged, then people, get on a campaign and they do, but that's what it's all ultimately geared towards. Clicks on social media only matter to the extent that they further that. Donations, same thing. Email, people sign up for our email list or whatever. It all needs to be funneled towards that. It's tough. This is, there's plenty of reasons to protest in this world, and people are going to be kind of human centric because that's humans are tribal animals and they care, and there are plenty of things to care about that aren't animal issues. But that's our ultimate orientation is towards mobilizing people. And we're, doing, I think a decent, the best job. I mean, if we had 1 million people marching in Washington, that would be us doing a really good job. But like, we're, I guess, doing it. I don't know how you define it. How do you set the standards? Like, we're doing, I guess, the best job of the animal rights movement. Because we're the ones that are sort of focused on this mission. On that note, I would just emphasize to people, like, this is like the thesis statement of everything I'm saying. We all have way more power than we give ourselves credit to, which might sound cliche or whatever. Me, myself, like, I went out there, I was kind of in the right place at the right time, or like whatever, like maybe, okay, you could say, why I'm not going to be, Glenn Greenwald's going to write about me, which I think is more achievable than people would think. But even so, if you're kind of like a pass or a less, full-time, ready to go get in prison and light yourself on fire, whatever person like me or you. But something like for example, in California, we banned the sale of fur. Huge industry. It's been around for forever. They threw hundreds of thousands of dollars. We literally caught them paying college kids. I shouldn't say college adults and high school, high school students as well, paying them to show up and protest and say they're against this fur ban. So anyway, the industry threw everything they could at stopping California from banning fur, and us, with the force of like a few hundred people involved a few hours a week, something like that, we were able to ban this massive industry in California. And the first, to do it in the first place is the hardest. Then after that, you have a precedent, you can do it. There was so much opposition to this and so much money poured into it. And anyway, maybe I didn't explain that in like the most concise way, but basically a few hundred people had this massive impact. California is a state with 40 million people. The bottom line is, for as much as people are like talking and people are active and people are posting on social media about politics, there are not actually that many people that are politically active, that are on the ground, which is really unfortunate in the grand scheme of things, but it also means that the few people that are have an outsized impact. So really encourage people to get active, talk to your local city council person, talk to people in your area, figure out what a united campaign is, and like figure out the campaign and like push, because I've seen it so many times. People are blown away by their own success when you actually like get dirty and go do something about it.
This idea of building a mass movement, a mass community of activists, you say that you're the XE of the organization who are focusing on this. I suppose, I could be wrong about this, but what it seems to me is that the majority of activists in the community that I'm connected to are focused on creating individual change, trying to encourage individuals to change their eating habits. So, what do you think about that focus on trying to get people to go vegan?
Yeah, so I highly encourage addressing that exact point. And actually, speaking of Wayne Shung, I was talking about, and he's like slightly trying to live this one down. Boycott vegan. If you just Google boycott veganism, Wayne Shung, and you'll find a couple of hater posts of people that didn't actually read his thing. But if you find the actual original article he wrote, boycott veganism, that addresses this point exactly. And bottom line is, social norms. It's the reason that people join a community and people are willing to go take drastic action and face criminal charges, because they got people around them that are supporting them. And it's a social norm in that circle that you're going to do this. To be one person all by yourself, it doesn't matter how right you are. If it's not the social norms around you, you can forget it. If you're in Iowa, have all the conversations in the world about animal rights, how bad animal ag is. Yep. People nod. And then what? They turn around and they're in Iowa still. And the norms are what they are. And find that person in 6 months, I don't know, their diet slightly changed, or, basically nothing is what I'm saying. So, as much as human beings sort of, we like to tell ourselves, and we all like to think that we are, rational, looking at facts and figures and so on or whatever, social norms tell the tale. Everybody went along with slavery 200 years ago. Everybody's going along with animal agriculture today. It's not because there was any logic behind any of it to begin with, but it is what it is. And so, as it results to individual outreach, it's a failed experiment. And I'm sorry, I wish it wasn't the case, but the number of vegans has been pretty steady, with this being the prevailing tactic over the past few decades. And now maybe, I don't know, the survey data that's kind of out there is pretty sketchy or whatever, but it might be going up a little bit on the basis of these other issues, not because people are increasing their overall support, their overall whatever for animal rights, but, environmental or for whatever other reasons. But, by and large, unfortunately, individual outreach has been a failed experiment. Going back to Wayne's experience, he was this, at the University of Chicago, and he just spent, I can't even remember how many hundreds of hours handing out however many hundreds of leaflets and vegan cookies, chocolate chip cookies, because he had read like, 1% or something like that of people that you hand a leaflet to, or you give a vegan sample, whatever to, are going to go vegan. So he does this, puts all these like thousands of hours in for a semester of school, and the enrollment in the vegan club at the University of Chicago decreased over that span of time. So I love you, all you animal rights people that are doing this. It's very intuitive to the whole go vegan thing. I totally get how it's intuitive. I was on board with that for a while. I just really encourage people to take a sober look at the results. And yeah, I think you'll kind of come around to kind of where I've come around to.
So here's my current take on this. And as always, I could always be wrong, I suppose. I do think there is value in encouraging people to make behavior changes, partly because the millions of people around the world who aren't eating animal products or are reducing animal product consumption will affect the number of animals who are being bred into existence, and therefore will reduce suffering. But there's also psychological effects to consider as well. And we know there's psychological evidence that if people consume animal products, they then view animals to have lower mental faculties. So they may have less concern for the well-being of animals. They think they're less sentient because of the fact that they're eating meat. I guess there's some cognitive dissonance going on there. So it may be that the people who are who had some kind of behavior change, whether reducing their consumption or eliminating their consumption, whether it's for health or the environment or for ethics, they then be more likely to become an activist, more likely to take the issue of animal ethics seriously. However, I do think that we have too much of a focus on individual change, and there needs to be a marked shift in our focus towards institutional messaging. I essentially agree with you. I guess I just want to acknowledge that there is value in it for the people who are spending time on it, and that they're linked. It's not black and white. For example, my flatmate here, I had a conversation with him at a Cube. He was a meat eater. He went vegan. He spoke to his sister, who also went vegan. She owned a restaurant, so the restaurant turned to vegan. So you can kind of, by changing individuals, you can also change institutions and restaurants, and it can have a broader impact. But I completely agree with you. There needs to be a shift, for sure.
And I think I agree with you maybe more than it might have come off as, because I think you're exactly right about getting a foot in the door. And so what I think both of us are saying is what matters is collective action. What is ultimately going to be the kind of mechanism for change is mass sustained collective action. And the vehicle to get there is to sort of make people feel good and sort of like a foot in the door to the movement. Whether that foot in the door is like, hey, okay, you're eating a little bit less meat or whatever, that can be a totally viable foot in the door. I find that a little bit challenging because it's sort of like there's kind of like a little bit of a weird, awkward connotation of like still sort of negative when they're like still eating meat 5 days a week or whatever. What I found easier to do the same psychological mechanism of a foot in the door is like you can already find common ground. I was on a podcast, mind-blowing in multiple ways. I was on a podcast with Ben O'Brien, who's this the Hunters Collective, and it's called like the Meat Eater Podcast, like the biggest, or one of the biggest hunting. And anyway, we found so much common ground, certainly not about his eating habits, but about
football.
Well, yeah, but about him, it's like people can agree with you on so much. It's like, yeah, you don't like animal cruelty. You don't want animals to be cruelly harmed. You think this industry is all messed up. And it's like, okay, well, that's already kind of is a foot in the door in a way. It's like, you're on board with me. It's like, yeah, I know this. The world is a horrible place, and what kind of pesticides and exploitative labor and whatever landed my food on my plate. I don't support that in my head. Like in principle, I don't support that. I'm just kind of existing in this system, and I'm focused on systemic change. I'm not going to be a perfect individual. I'm not even trying to be a perfect individual. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to create systemic change. Similarly, when I talked to the Iowa Select Farms whistleblower, early on, it's like, I want to be this guy's buddy. He was working like his head, he was so motivated. He was just like one of us for 4 weeks. This guy who has pigs in a pen in his backyard, who drives pigs in a slaughterhouse truck for a living. This guy was as motivated as any of us, all night, texting, calling, here's where they're at, here's where they're moving them, here's like whatever. And it started off, we had some phone conversations, and he was giving us a fake name, and we thought literally 50-50 shot. This guy's a plant that's trying to like get us on some sort of like hacking charges because he's giving us his login info or some shit. But he got the foot in the door. Like he asked us, he's like, hey, well, so what's you guys' take on, free range pigs? I think if I would have told him the thing that a lot of animal advocates told him, he would have been a lot less motivated about it. And, my answer was like, I don't think it's great. And I also don't think that a lot of what puts my food on my table is great either. But I also think that what I'm doing and what you're doing is a huge service to the world that dwarfs whatever individual consumption concerns there are. And I think you're a good person with your heart and mind in the right place. And he was in.
Right. Yeah, no, he's an interesting case study. I suppose what could be perhaps damaging to what we're trying to achieve, our movement, is that a lot of people seem to think that you can't do anything for animals or be an activist unless you're vegan, because then you're a hypocrite. I was talking to JC Reese, who's the first person I had on this podcast who works for Sentience Institute, and he was talking about how he was doing a march, and someone came over and and he was like, I really love what you're doing. And JC asked him to join the march, and the guy said, oh, I can't, I'm not a vegetarian. The thing is, the Sentience Institute, they've done research to look at the views of the US public, and they found something around 48% of the general public or even I think it was 50%, would support a ban on factory farming, and then around 48% to 50% would support abolishing slaughterhouses. There is support for institutional change. People will support us, but they won't change their individual behaviors, because in the same questionnaire, people were asked if whether they think eating animals is a personal choice, should be a personal choice, and the vast majority say yes. So I mean, these right. So these results seem very contradictory.
Oh no, I've talked to JC a few times. I cite those stats all the time, and it's I think it exactly highlights the point. I mean, imagine, let's say you go to a Black Lives Matter protest, and you're just like, God, George Floyd, the whole thing like this is just so horrible. We need to speak up. And the person's like, oh, and the first person you see there, the organizer of the march or whatever, I was like, oh, that's really cool that you're here. So have you pledged to only buy from Black-owned businesses yet? And you're like, wait, what? No, I don't know. And they're like, oh, no, it's fine. It's fine. It's totally fine. You'll get there one day. Just keep, it's totally fine. And what you're hearing in your head is like, oh, it's totally not fine. I'm not part of the cool kids club, but they don't have that. Like the animal rights movement is unique in that way that we've sort of like set up this sort of like
exclusive club.
Oh yeah, this club. And I mean, if veganism, it's just so convoluted and so corporatized, and there's just like so much, if it actually meant what it should mean and what it was originally intended to mean, then it could be a useful tactic to say like, hey, this is a social statement, a political statement in support of anti-speciesism, but it's not, then it becomes like, oh, is it cruelty-free? No, it's not cruelty-free. Whatever your body is not cruelty-free, so it's just, and so it's to the point I just don't really utter the V word.
Right. And it's important to note here that by saying this, that you want to be more inclusive, it's not saying that you think it's morally acceptable to buy animal products. If you go through your life buying animal products, you're going to cause a lot of animal suffering. But what's important is that focus on effectiveness for the animals. And in order to reach the goal that we want, we need as many people as possible.
It's morally unacceptable to embrace speciesism. And so it's like, it just gets really slippery when you say, in terms of your individual choices, like, okay, maybe we could say like, oh, it's unacceptable to purchase animal products. Like, okay, is it unacceptable to purchase quote unquote vegan product that we know has all these negative externalities? Like, do I have to grow plants in my yard? I don't know. Like, I don't know exactly where to draw that line.
Yeah. I think you've got a good point there. And I suppose on reflection, I think it makes more sense to just to say, I think it's bad to do an action that causes suffering. And I think it's good to do an action that reduces suffering. And when we're talking about is something morally wrong or is something a moral obligation, it gets a bit more difficult trying to define what these things are, because we're all living very flawed lives where we're doing actions that cause suffering. But certainly we can say that buying animal products is an action. It's depending on the animal product as well, because there's different degrees of suffering for each product. But if you're going to go out and buy chicken and eggs every day, you're going to be putting more suffering into the world.
Yeah, I think that the normative effect is at least as significant as, and not to minimize, it's direct harm. You're buying a body part, you're buying eggs, it's a horrible process with lots of suffering. The normative effect, I think, is the big reason behind, something like veganism, to say like, I'm just not going to, make this public statement endorsing this system to participate in it. But I talk to people, I say, look at it the same way as racism. Okay. You talk to average person on the street, 99% of them or whatever would say, in principle, people are equal regardless of race. It's not, like totally. And so we should, I just want to get to that. Let's get to that same place with speciesism, where in principle, and I am convinced, I don't know, I need to and this is kind of like within the DXE universe, like, should just do like a video and just like really get to the point where we have so many animal advocates that can talk to somebody, and in 5 minutes or probably 2 minutes, you can get somebody on board in principle with animal liberation. I mean, Ben O'Brien, like, go, it's mind blowing, that whole experience I had with this guy. In principle, he was on board with animal liberation. It's like, yeah, when you elevate the rights of children, when children were child labor, or when of Black people, when you elevate the rights of women, we don't look back in history and say, hey, this whole equality thing, that was a big mistake. We got to dial it back. And we're not going to do it with animals either. It's like there's, in fact, animal liberation, this is like the quotable quote that I think we should put out there, is like, animal liberation could be the single most significant event in human history in terms of the overall increase in well-being and decrease in violence, that sort of a thing. I mean, it's just in all the same ways. And it doesn't mean if you oppose racism, where did my coffee come from? Where did my cocoa come from? I don't know, child slavery, the world's a horrible place. That doesn't mean I think racism is awesome. That means the world is a horrible place, and I'm just kind of maneuvering my way through it.
Mm-hmm. When we talk about institutional change versus individual change, often it can feel a little bit abstract. So I suppose the activists who are currently doing lots of sort of Cuba Truths, for example, with Anonymous to the Voiceless, or going out and doing street interviews, I suppose one of the things they can do is start trying to create more activists, focus on creating a community of activists, getting more people involved in the animal rights community. What else are some tips you think for like this shift that we want to see? How do people actually do that in practice, create that shift?
Yeah. So I mean, I think if we could get to sort of step one there, where people internalize in their head, and that's what they're thinking about. It's not, get somebody to go to, like the 22, whatever, to go vegan, like that. I just really think just eliminate that as a goal. Somebody says, yeah, I'll check out the website. They walk away, like, let's just call that nothing. Let's just call that accomplishing nothing. Sorry. Love y'all. I just don't think that's going anywhere.
Yeah, I would disagree with you that it's accomplishing nothing. And I can certainly come up with like examples. But like, let's talk about. I mean, I agree with you that there needs to be a shift. I think we're in the same place. Yeah, you're just being dramatic in your language.
In terms of, in terms of Lucas Walker, and Iowa Select Farms, that's 1,000 or 10,000 people. They say they're going to check out the website, or something like that.
Yeah,
get those make friends. Like be a fucking cool person and make friends and get them excited about it. And I mean, I'm in a privileged situation here. I live in Berkeley, California, and so on. But to get to the place where on Friday nights, like, I'm hanging out with activists and we're like having beers and we're like brainstorming our next cockamamie activism scheme. So just like it's fully integrated. It's not like this giant laborious sacrifice and everyone around you thinks you're weird, and it's just like it's just weighing on you to like, oh God, I'm gonna buy oat milk and everyone's gonna look at me weird and it costs more, and like I don't even know what are the environmental effects, does it even make sense? Like, dude, make it cool, make it like your friend group, and it all just like happens naturally.
Get people involved, get their contact information, stay in touch, and try and get them to join the community, essentially build a community. Okay, you're someone who's been on a lot of factory farms. How many? Can you give me like a rough estimate? How many times have you been in a factory farm?
30 maybe.
What's it like?
Yeah, well, if you by now, like a lot of people have seen the footage and so on. So it's just drudgery. I think pigs in gestation crates. This is like in Iowa Select Farms brag right on their website. Oh, at any moment there's 180,000 sows, something like that, and you just, how can you even wrap your head around that? And it's, to me, it's like ventilation shutdown is this thing that people have never heard of, and it's like this new thing that happens on the basis of COVID. But I think a lifetime of gestation crate is like probably as egregious, I don't know, the worst disgusting splitting of hairs to be done or whatever. But it's just, there's this disconnect between where things that are normal, routine, whatever, like our brain, it's like a coping mechanism, just kind of like, oh, well, if it's commonplace, then it must be fine. Somebody who's whatever must be fine. Which is, there's a whole like evolution that got us to that place where it's like, well, I still gotta eat and pay, deal with my life. I can't be caught up in like whatever else is going on over here. But yeah, I mean, they're disgusting places. They're always just smell horrible, and it's just a dreariness in the air, and just the lifelessness of these pigs that are just like looking up at you. The pigs are the ones that are, this is a little bit speciesist, so the pigs are the ones that have that like more human-ish emotion that you can like really vibe off of them. And and you see like the mother pigs are just, it's just the dreariness. Then you see like the newborn piglets, and they're like bouncing around like puppies, because it's like they just haven't like kind of like lived life in a horrible way to be hopeless. And they're kind of, for the first few days or weeks, like you're bouncing around with your, just like, isn't that bad and whatever.
There's something kind of poetically sad about that you've got the adult pig who's just in despair, in this depression, with this life of just no stimulation. And then you've got the babies who are coming into this world completely ignorant of what they're getting into. And due to their genetics, they have this playfulness and this kind of, they're able to get joy from life just from running around like human children are. And that transition from that almost like original positivity that seems to be there to the end result of just despair when you've been there long enough is just kind of heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's and you'll, you can sort of see if you go into these places and here's like the newborn pigs, here's like a week on, and it, and then you sort of see where it kind of goes in the other direction. Yeah, it's just like a dog. It's just like the same people who are literally, and I know, I've spent a lot of time looking at these folks who work for like Iowa Select Farms that have dogs all over their Twitter and so on. And then they go to work and they will take like a smiling picture of like, oh, this mama is going to be due in 2 weeks. Like this, like it's all just like fine and well. It's so weird. And like, you just like, trying to break through that, but it's so kind of intentionally insular, at least at like the corporate level, that, these folks are never going to agree to something like this. Like never in a million years am I going to get the communications director of Iowa Select Farms to come and have a conversation like this. And, even like with that one, it's just like, do you ever like wonder why? Like, is it really just because like, what's going to happen? What sort of cooties are you going to get if you get on a call with Matt Johnson, or if you go to court? Or is it, the fact that like, no, there is no, way to actually defend what you're doing. It's, I don't know, I'm kind of off the original question, but yeah.
Factory farming seems plausible to say that this will be looked back on as the biggest moral atrocity in human existence.
Yeah, and I think that, I was actually having a conversation with Leighton Woodhouse, a good friend of mine who is a writer for The Intercept, and it's like, I think that people don't, even when sort of things like that are said, I think people don't quite grasp it. And I think, you have, folks like Glenn Greenwald, who's done a ton of awesome work on animal issues, and will say like, this is one of the great moral evils of our time. I think people kind of maybe underestimate that. If you say it, great moral evils of our time, it's like, I think your average reader or reviewer might hear that as like, maybe that's like 10% of what we should be focused on. It's like one of the great ones. It's like, no, I think if you run the numbers on this, this is like 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times greater than human suffering, which is totally opening me up. Here we go. Straight white guys, all, blah, 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 dismissing of human rights issues. So ready, set, go.
Yeah, you have to be careful with that kind of thing. But yeah, just think about yourself as an individual. Like when you're having the worst day of your life, when you're in serious pain, it fucking sucks. And it's like that for every individual who's suffering. So when you consider the intensity of the suffering that's happening on factory farms, and then you consider the scale, and the scale, I mean, it doesn't matter what I say, we cannot do it justice because our brains are not capable of comprehending this kind of scale.
Yeah, because it's paralyzing if you did.
Yeah. And even when I say this is probably going to be looked back on as the biggest moral atrocity in the history of mankind, like, it probably doesn't really hit home for me what that really means. Because like all of us, I mean, we grew up in a society where it's completely normal, and we look outside and everyone's taking part in it, and people are blind to it. In fact, even people who are very, very left wing in places like London will still not take it seriously and like kind of laugh at the idea that you think this is like a terrible, terrible thing. I mean, like, I guess that's why it's maybe good to focus on things like factory farming rather than maybe the abstract idea of like not using animals or veganism, because it's hard for anyone to say that, you know, factory farming is okay. I think like vast majority of people who eat meat would say that like factory farming is terrible and it should probably be abolished. Well, I mean, we have the research that around 50% of the US population believe that. Okay, so when we're talking about institutional change, I guess what like we're kind of going towards is the idea of ultimately changing laws. This has got to be, I suppose, incremental, a gradual change to getting to where we want to be. It's not like we can suddenly abolish slaughterhouses in the next 6 months or so. What kind of laws exist at the moment that you think can be lobbied against, that we can potentially can eliminate in like the near to medium future?
Yeah, so that's a good question, but real quick, to back up on the premise of that. In theory, I think that you wouldn't necessarily need to have those incremental steps, and you wouldn't. It wouldn't need to be the case. So very hypothetically, if we had 1 million people who were committed to sustain direct action for animal rights, you know, we could have an animal bill of rights within a month. That's not about to happen, but just to sort of set the North Star of this conversation, and that fundamentally, even these legislative gains are just sort of like a measure of our power, fundamentally, more so than whatever they're accomplishing in and of themselves, which again, something like the fur ban, I can't even remember how many hundreds of millions of dollars of fur are, or I guess still are, it hasn't went into effect yet in California. But that's actually, if you really just go like pure movement building theory of change, it's actually just a measurement of your power rather than like an end in and of itself. But pragmatically speaking, that's what's going to happen. And so what we're working on through much debate, and that's one thing I think is really great about Direct Action Everywhere, is that it's a democratic organization, democratically elected leaders, which I had the privilege of being one of the 5 elected members of DXC core leadership. And through much deliberation, where we're kind of at right now is a factory farm moratorium in California that we're lobbying for to get Governor Gavin Newsom to push for that. We don't think, we know that the public is very much on board with that. And kind of one of these things where the public, it needs to be like pretty overwhelming, because unfortunately you have this issue where, if you sit down and you talk to people about factory farming and all the things that's wrong with it, and ventilation shutdown and so on, and I mean the Sentient Institute survey results, so many people are with us if they have to choose. Unfortunately, there's a very tiny percentage of that of people who are actually politically active in it in any way, even voting. And so it kind of, if you're from a pure cynical politician perspective, it really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if 100% of people are on board with the issue. If they're not doing anything about it, it's like, well, 100% of people say something, but they're not doing anything about it. And over here, I'm getting offered $10 million in bribes. So you can either take the $10 million or you can not be elected. So that's the big challenge, is to get enough people that are, to the point where there are political consequences. So many people left, right, across the spectrum will just like agree with you. But you just, literally, we got to be hard asses and be like, well, thanks, that's not good enough. And unfortunately, I think so many, sorry, I just keep thinking of new elements of this. So many animal activists have grown up and had experiences like I've had, like I'm sure you've had, where people are dismissive and mocking and like whatever. And like the first moment you get like a little bit of validation, you're just like, oh, thank you. You're the best person ever. You said something nice. You said you agree with me in some tiny way. But if I don't know, I'm not saying to go around being a dick to people, but there needs to be political consequences. There needs to be people voting on the basis of these issues and preferably really taking action and, really having strong political consequences for these actions. That's where the change is really going to come. And these polling numbers are kind of a good leading indicator, but in and of themselves, they actually don't directly translate to anything.
Mm-hmm. So obviously, we've been talking about how bad things are for quite a long time. I want to finish up by asking what could be a tough question. I'm not sure. But are there any laws that have come into play, say, over the last 5-10 years that are helping animals? Like, what's the progress that we're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are, they're largely symbolic, but that is kind of an indicator. You look at the anti-cruelty bill that Donald Trump signed into law, which was something that applies to dogs and cats and not to farm animals, but it's sort of like, hey, he's taking the time of day to do something like that. And you look at the gains. I mean, the fur ban, I think, is a good example. And in California, which originally was at the city level, and then we expanded it out, starting in Berkeley. And in the state of California, there have been various, on paper at least, groundbreaking animal welfare reforms. Proposition 2 in 2008, Proposition 12 in 2018 passed 60 some odd % on both of them. So it's, if you're a California voter and you're not, if it's like an up or down vote, do you want, cruelty or non-cruelty? People will choose the non-cruelty. What's interesting about that, again, which sort of is another example to highlight the point, you couldn't get it passed through the legislators, even though you had, I think it was 63% of people that support this reform. The legislators aren't going to put their name to it and have to deal with their donors. They made us do it the hard way, where you had to get however many millions of signatures to force a vote on it. The legislators wouldn't do it. Even something 63% supported. And you see the same sort of dynamic, in the US with something like gun control, overwhelmingly supported by people. But who are the people that are actually taking action on this issue? It's not the people who oppose it, people who want gun control are kind of like, yeah, I support gun control, and they don't vote on that issue. People who are like your big Second Amendment people that are, it's a whole big macho thing. There's a couple % of the US that are 1,000% pro-gun. And there's also the NRA that's giving money to it. So anyway, it is a similar dynamic here. We're making progress, but we need to really bridge that gap between nominal stated support, and we need to kind of not be satisfied with that, I guess, in a way, and really focus on what's really going to count.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree that we shouldn't slow down. We should speed up, and we should think about our tactics and try to improve. I also think it is good to focus on some of the positives and the progress we made. And it struck me fairly recently. I was looking at the manifestos of the political parties in the UK, and every single party, even the ones on the right, the Conservatives, they're if you actually look at what they're saying about animal welfare, it's very positive. I mean, it seems that every political party now has to have that they're pro-animal welfare, that they're trying to make changes to improve animal welfare. And sure, it's nowhere near what we want to see, what we think should be happening. But let's remember how far we've come. I mean, we've come so far from when they were burning animals alive, cats alive, just for entertainment. And people literally didn't care about animals. We've got to a point now where political parties have to come across as pro-animal welfare, or people will think they're insane. And members of the general public are against animal cruelty. If someone comes out and says they're not against animal cruelty, people are going to look at them like they're a complete weirdo. People generally think animals can suffer, and they think that animal suffering is bad, and they wish there were less of it. We have made there's been an incredible shift towards people caring about the well-being of animals. And I'm sure that's not just a result of activist work, although part of it will be. It'll be a result of just people having pets in their lives. People care so much for the animals that they have a chance to connect with. But I do think it's really important when it can seem so doom and gloom, when we're hearing about things like ventilation shutdown, to also remember that we're actually making progress here. Our work isn't in vain. We're getting somewhere, and yeah, I think it's important to sometimes spend time thinking about that.
100%. Yeah, the political parties and every animal ag company out there, right, has that on their, Iowa Select Farms is, we got all sorts of documentation. They're like, animal abuse will not be tolerated, and those that are in violation of the law should be taken to the local authorities. Like, all right, bro. But yeah, it certainly is progress, and
it's symbolic.
It's inevitable. Yeah, it's inevitable. We're moving in that direction, and you see it when, you see examples all over the place. And Iowa Select Farms employees, really interesting. We kind of got an inside glimpse because we had these whistleblowers where it's like when we first confronted. So when the VSD happens, we got this footage, but the public hasn't seen it yet. And I confronted this COO, kind of went through, they sent this email, these activists are taunting and harassing us, like whatever, and the people were pretty against us. They're like, hey, why are you kicking us while we're down? Like, it's a horrible situation. We don't like doing this any more than anybody else does. Like, leave us alone. It's already a hard time. You don't need to exacerbate how bad it is. That's what everybody was saying. Then fast forward a week and a half, people saw the footage. Very different story. Like, oh, that's what we're dealing with. And their defense is money. That's the only reason why. So, there's a giant, I think, significantly more so in the US than the rest of the world, but there is a big old industry, aimed at suppressing this stuff. But, especially in this day and age with the internet and so on, you can only really keep a lid on this stuff so long. So, as long as we manage to not like wipe ourselves out with climate change or nuclear war or whatever, seems pretty inevitable that we're, moving in a good direction.
Mm-hmm. And people who are listening to this, who are inspired by your work, and if they're wondering what they can do to make a difference, what tips would you have for them?
Well, getting active in general and trying to inspire others to do so. I think what DXE is doing, I wish it wasn't unique. I wish a lot more people were doing it, but as it stands right now, I think that what Direct Action Everywhere is doing is unique in that regard and is focused on long-term building of a sustained movement, which I think is the best bet for the average person. If you're a chemist or whatever, and you can go create the next lab-grown meat, don't do that. Don't let me stop you. Go do that or whatever. But for 95% of people, 99% of people, I think you go there. Or if you happen to be independently wealthy, if you're making $1 million a year, go make $1 million a year and donate most of it or whatever. Other than those circumstances, I think getting in community building for a sustained movement is the way to go. And, Direct Action Everywhere, I think, is kind of the main mechanism to do so. People can go to dxe.io/join, and that'll kind of lay it out for you. If there happens to be a chapter in your area, you can plug into, that's great. If not, that has kind of the tools for you to start a chapter in your own area and just make it happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, Matt, it's been absolutely wonderful talking to you. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I think I have this sense that the activism that I've mostly been doing over the last 3 years or so has been kind of like nice activism that I get a lot of pleasure from because I'm often talking to people and I get a lot of pleasure from talking to people. You've been in this other side of the world where you're really on the front line. You're really doing the dirty work. You're going into factory farms. You're documenting it. You're putting your freedom on the line. And I find that really inspiring. So, from the bottom of my heart, I thank you for what you're doing. I really believe it's making a difference. And if there's ever anything I can do to support you, I'll be happy to help.
Oh, thank you so much. And you already are. I think when communications gets out there like this, we're not only educating the public and spreading awareness and furthering change, but you're also actually are protecting folks like me because you're making it even more costly. Every bit of communication that's getting the message out there makes it even more daunting for them to say like, oh shit, do we really want to put this guy in prison and deal with more and more and more of this stuff? So thank you. And thank you to the whole countless people who are supporting folks like me and enabling me to do the stuff that I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. And where can people go to find out about your work?
So directactioneverywhere.com, the main website would be an obvious one. And I guess I'll plug it again here. dxe.io/join is where people can really get involved with Direct Action Everywhere. And otherwise, look me up on Facebook, Twitter, Matt Johnson. You can email me, Matt at directactioneverywhere.com. And don't feel shy or like you're imposing. I think that developing activists is about the best possible use of my time. So I'm very happy to get those kind of emails and help people get active.
Okay, well, if you're still listening, you have made it to the end of the conversation. And for that, I thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking an interest in the kinds of things that I'm talking about. I really hope you found something valuable. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I certainly enjoyed having the conversation, and it gives me a lot of joy to know that there's someone out there listening. So thanks again. I really appreciate it. And a big thank you to my Patreons who are making this content possible. Please do head over to my Patreon if you find my content really valuable and you want to support me in making this happen. It seems to me that Matt is exactly the sort of person that should be elevated in our community. Not only is he very relatable and very good with talking to the press, but he's also someone who's very focused on effectiveness. How do we help animals as effectively as possible? And that's where I think the focus should be. Now, you may find yourself disagreeing with some of the things he says about how we should shift our strategy, or some of the things I say about it. But what's important is that we're having these discussions about effectiveness, that we're talking about how we can improve what we're doing and how we can help animals more effectively. We're all very different humans with different minds. We're going to have lots of disagreements. And, what brings us together, I hope, is that we all agree on the mission. We all agree on helping animals, making a better world for animals. And when we have disagreements with each other about how to best help animals, I think it's really important to remember that we have that middle ground that's so incredibly important. And of course, I have to acknowledge that I could be wrong about certain things. I've been wrong before, and if I am wrong about something, I want to know about it. So if you disagree with anything I say, then please do let me know in the comment section below. And also just let me know what you're thinking of the podcast so far. I do hope you're finding it valuable, and of course, I'm open to hearing critical feedback as well as positive feedback. Also, let me know if there's any specific guests that you would like to see on the podcast. Now, I do quickly want to make a little announcement that the Patreon of the month goes to Volker Reksik. I may have pronounced that wrong. I'm really bad with pronunciation, so I'll put the text on the screen just in case. But Volker or Volker, thank you so much for choosing to support me. It's very kind of you, and you have won a Soy Boy t-shirt, a t-shirt from animalriots.com. So we actually have only two colors, and that's black and white, and you can choose which one you like. So do let me know, and let me know your address, and I'll send it over right away. With that said, to everyone who's listening, thank you so much for being here. I hope that wherever you are in the world, whatever time it is, that you're having a good day. And I will see you very soon with another podcast session.